Going from one to the other, we are joined with Esteban Carrillo. Esteban Carrillo, he's an Ecuadorian based journalist currently working for The Cradle, a great outlet. I binge those articles because you guys are fantastic in your
Thank you,
writing.
Jamal.
He was previously with Telesur English. Esteban, welcome to the show, man. You doing okay today?
I'm doing great. I'm doing great. Good to see you, Jamal, and everyone else who's joining us this morning.
Oh man, it's always good to have you. I have to bring up Rubio. So Rubio was given testimony, and we saw the picture of Donald Trump shaking the hand of a head chopper, Al Jelani, that he helps. Oh, that was his nom de guerre. What is Al Shar or
Mara,
Shara?
shout out today. Shout out.
Yeah, yeah, he is like his different name today. Most people know him as Al Jelani, but he is now quote unquote president, jihadist president of Syria, as I like to call him.
Appointed himself president.
Yeah, he did. It just a hostile, brutal, vicious takeover
Mhm.
paid for by Turkey, the US, Israel, supported by Israel. I mean, for God's sake, the US put billions of dollars into trying to overthrow Assad. Trump, we're stealing the oil, we're stealing the oil. Trump defending Idlib from pressure that was coming from Russia, Iran, and from Syria, allowing Idlib to basically explode with all of these terrorists and jihadists come running out into Syria and able to take over the country. All right. So Rubio, giving testimony recently, said this, which is amazing after after everything that's taken place. And I want to get your take on this as to what this means. I'll say it that way.
If you look at the history of the region, when Syria is unstable, the region becomes unstable. And this has certainly been true after the Arab Spring led to the Assad rebellion against Assad, and that really destabilized the entire region. And then it turned Syria, frankly, into a playground for jihadist groups, including ISIS and others that used it to operate and to destabilize their partners. So you have this change in December. In my view, which I've discussed with many of you individually, is the bad news is that the transitional authority figures, they didn't pass their background check with the FBI. Okay, they've got a tough history and one that we understand. But on the flip side of it is, if we engage them, it may work out, it may not work out. If we did not engage them, it was guaranteed to not work out. In fact, it is our assessment that, frankly, the transitional authority, given the challenges they're facing, are maybe weeks, not many months, away from potential collapse and a full-scale civil war of epic proportions. Basically,
you put these jihadists in power, you acknowledge, even in this, right? These guys didn't pass their background checks.
That's
Okay.
insane. That's such an insane quote.
Yeah, that's a hell of a way to put that these guys are jihadists and terrorists, right?
Yes.
That the leader of the country was one of the head of ISIS.
Yeah.
And okay. And from that, I'm sorry, I've been arguing with that separate issue. And now you give an assessment that we think that this government, where Trump shook the hand of the guy, is weeks away from a complete collapse and a total civil war of epic proportions.
Yeah.
That is amazing.
Well, I think it's very interesting. First of all, last week, Donald Trump says that Shara has a very strong past, right? He says a strong past, a fighter. And now, like, not even 7 days later, you have Marco Rubio saying these guys didn't even pass an FBI check because there were a bunch of jihadis, Islamist extremists, as you said it yourself, a bunch of head choppers. And I just sent you something. I don't know how easy it is to put up, but it's that the former ambassador to Syria, the U.S. ambassador to Syria, Robert Ford, essentially, patting himself on the back during some symposium, during some forum, in which he talks about how he helped, rebrand Shara from head chopper Julani, the deputy commander of ISIS, to,
by the way, I already have that clip.
Today.
And I had the clip waiting for you because I knew you were coming on and I had the clip waiting for you. But please continue. I'm sorry.
No, it's such an amazing thing to see. And, in terms of just like how kind of, I guess, the form, the facade of things have just completely collapsed, right? And in terms of just U.S. officials coming out and saying the quiet part out loud, not really caring anymore. It's what Rubio is saying, he's not wrong. What he says about that Syria, if Syria becomes unstable, then the entire region becomes unstable. That's true. That's why this war was initiated in the first place. And that's, he talks about the that the ISIS, is gonna like revive, or that the country was taken over by ISIS. Who led ISIS into Syria,
Yeah.
right? Who opened the doors? Who opened the floodgates? Who funded these groups? Which media outlet, it was Al Jazeera, by the way, started creating this narrative that Sunnis were being persecuted in Syria just so that these extremists would call for a caliphate and start flooding via Turkey. It was all NATO. It was all NATO and the Gulf. So now they just kind of go back and be like, oh my God, we cannot allow this to happen. Well, for the first time, it already happened. You already let it happen. So this is going to be the second time that this happens. And the fact about the civil war, I think it's like a two-sided thing. I think, first of all, it's a Rubio trying to give some sort of excuse, I would say, to justify lifting the sanctions, right? Remember, Donald Trump announces an end to the sanctions, and then the day after, the U.S. Treasury is saying we don't really have a framework to lift sanctions because some of them are like executive decree, which can be repealed, and some of them are congressional. They were passed by Congress, so you need to get Congress to lift them. So Rubio, is testifying in front of the Senate, and he's essentially saying, there's going to be a civil war if you don't lift sanctions, to kind of, I guess, like grease the wheels a bit. But on the other hand, he's not speaking, completely dishonestly in this sense, because just over the past couple of days, for example, in the north of Syria, clashes reignited between the Kurds and the government forces, the Turkish-backed Syrian National Army, that is part of this government, former ISIS, former Al-Qaeda. About a month after the United States brokered a ceasefire, right? And the Kurds agreed to join the army. Now, all of a sudden, the clashes erupt again. So it kind of goes to show you, and what's been happening with the Druze in the south, what's been happening with the Alawites and the ethnic cleansing that, Sergei Lavrov spoke about this yesterday, condemning the Syrian authorities for doing this. You can see that this is actually a brittle administration, quote unquote. This is not a government self-appointed that really has a tight grip on Syria, right? What they have is the support of the West. And what they have is a bunch of jihadis who are, ready to go door to door killing a bunch of people. But they still don't, the EU announced lifting the sanctions this week. So that's probably going to give them some help. And remember that the Gulf nations paid Syria's debt to the World Bank, which was like $15 million, opening the door for the IMF, for the World Bank, for all of these, organizations to come in and start flooding money into Syria, into Shara's pockets, into his government pockets, but giving the impression, right, that Syria is a safe place to invest. That's another thing that Rubio said, that we need to lift the sanctions because investors do not want to be sanctioned. And again, it goes to show you, why were these sanctions implemented in the first place, right? If all of a sudden today they are so hurtful to Syria, weren't they hurtful to Syria 7-8 years ago when they first were enacted?
It's wild to me that I was talking to this about Arno, where we're in a different context though. Like where in Ukraine, Trump is trying to pretend like, hey, I'm just the mediator. I'm just a third-party mediator.
I'm just here to see.
Yeah, while still being part of the conflict. And for this, is like, yeah, man, ISIS just went bananas. And, we had to beat back ISIS. And, now these guys have taken over. Missing the fact that, Obama himself had spent billions of dollars to overthrow the Syrian government. Mm-hmm. Trying to overthrow the Syrian government, by the way, goes all the way back to like George Bush Jr. So you're talking about like 20, 30 years of them working to undermine that government and to try to take down that government, with Obama putting in billions and billions of dollars to do so. Yeah. Where these ISIS groups were being funded by the US in many respects. And so it's like, okay, man, are you really sitting here making this case to us that these guys just went bananas out of the blue? And these other guys who've taken over, using a euphemism, haven't passed an FBI background check with strong histories. Yeah, because they were fucking ISIS. Like Jelani himself was leader of ISIS, or one of the leaders of ISIS himself, right? And so the notion that Donald Trump shakes the man's hand, protected him in Idlib, as you point out, this Brit who was talking about it, effectively saying, look, I, greased the wheels between him and the United States.
Yeah.
And even showing pictures, if you notice in the background, of what he looked like back
Yeah.
then.
He
When he
gives
was
a
chopping
whole
heads.
explanation, right? He says, like, look at him now, look at him then.
Yeah.
It's really transparent, You cannot fault these people for being, at this point at the very least, for being dishonest. They're being very honest about what they did and what their role
Just
was.
astonishing. I'm
Yeah,
just saying, the
but
way that the U.S. deals with this is we're acting like we're this impartial actor in
yeah,
this.
yeah.
And
And
we're
we're
just
trying
giving
to
this,
help, You're trying to
yeah,
help.
this
It's
meta-analysis. And by the way, the entire point of getting rid of the sanctions was because, as you pointed out, they understood that those sanctions were crushing. That part
no,
of the reason that the Syrian government collapsed in the first place was
exactly.
those sanctions and stealing the oil.
Exactly. The Caesar Act was such heavy, such a harsh package of sanctions. You didn't just sanction Syria; you sanctioned any country that even there to work with Syria, and you single out the financial institutions, you single out reconstruction, you single out, purchasing medicine. Remember what happened, Jamal, in the earthquake of 2023, 2 years ago. When the United States wouldn't give Syria waivers to get humanitarian aid in after this huge earthquake hits, the south of Turkey and the north of Syria, and the UN, is essentially begging the United States to give a waiver, to give a humanitarian waiver, but they didn't, right? Because but imagine if it was Shara, you would have if he had been president, then all of a sudden you would have all the nations in the world joining hands, let's help Syria. But it didn't happen, and I think that's more than enough to show you just really the level of dishonesty that is at work here. And I think right now Shara in particular has every reason to believe that he can survive, I guess. Although, remember, I don't know if you saw that there was apparently some talk in the US government about assassinating him.
Yeah.
It's a very strange thing, like these news are coming out, because then you also have Israel. You can never forget about Israel, right, in the south, that if Syria has been trying to be torn apart and destabilized for as long, is because that's what Israel has been desires, right? This is the desires of the Israeli state.
Right there. That's the other part.
Mhm.
So if you're looking at like Syriana analysis, what is the name? It's not Kevlar.
Kabork
Kevlar.
Almasi.
He has a damn good show, right?
Yeah.
And what they pointed out like a year ago was that there's no way they're going to allow a head chopper to be head of Syria. There's no way. And the only reason you would do that and allow something like that is because you know it's going to fall apart, allowing Israel to take more territory in Syria, saying, hey, we didn't have a choice. Look at what they're doing to the Druze. We have to get more involved, right?
Yeah.
Hey, we have to create a buffer against this destabilization that's taking place. I mean, let's be honest, right? If you have a stable Syria, can you really create this greater Israel?
No,
Not
not
really.
at all.
No,
Not at all.
it would never
That's in
happen,
the
right?
way. Yeah.
If you have a destabilized Syria, like I keep making this argument, war, you can justifiably take territory in war. It's just part of war. You can't do that in stable eras. Like if we're stable countries, I can't just say, hey, by the way, I'm going to take X amount of kilometers of your territory. People are like, what? That's outrageous. I'm not going to allow that.
There's an act of war. Yeah.
It's an act of war. But if you're already destabilized and your country is already in turmoil, and the country can say, yeah, we feel unsafe. So, we need to move in another few kilometers.
And when the propaganda is so strong, that people don't really understand what has happened in Syria, right? Like a regular person, not somebody that follows the news. All they know about Syria is that it's just like an unstable country. And then you hear Rubio come out and give these statements, and I guess in your perspective they make sense, because in a way they do, but at the same time, it's just missing so much context, and it's rewriting history, in front of our eyes. It's just like rewriting everything. But again, this is what we're seeing, for example, with the genocide in Gaza as well, which all of a sudden you have left and right, countries coming out to condemn it 19 months into it.
I don't think that's straightforward, though. I think the reason that they're coming, I honest to God think that the reason they're coming out condemning that is because an attack on Iran is imminent. And they want to distance themselves, saying, hey, look, man, for the last 2 days, we've been condemning Israel. As after they strike Iran, it's like, We don't have our hands on this at all because we were condemning Israel for the last 2 days, despite the
Mhm.
genocide that was taking place for the last year and a half. I
Exactly.
think it's that. I could be wrong. I think that's why all of the propaganda about Trump and Israel is coming out. Trump tells Netanyahu to allow them to eat, stop the starvation campaign. Okay, dude, I don't buy the premise of any of this. I'm sorry, give me your take on that. Do you think I'm being too cynical, too much of a hard ass
No,
on
no,
this?
no. I think I think it's theater. I think it's completely theater.
Yeah.
Because it would be very interesting to see exactly what is the tipping point for the US, for the EU, because Israel's not slowing down, right? Like their invasion of Gaza, they haven't allowed any aid in. They have allowed, I think, less than 10 trucks, or just a handful, and a bunch of them not even carrying humanitarian aid. They're just carrying shrouds.
Yeah.
So there's the situation. You know what? The UN, a UN official yesterday said that 14,000 babies are at risk of dying within 48 hours. Today, within 24 hours, and nothing really seems to tip the scale, right? So I think you might be onto something with your theory about Iran, because if Israel moves against Iran, maybe that would be a tipping point, right? Because it really seems like the United States does not want a war right now, right?
I
This
don't
is
buy
one.
that premise. I'm sorry. I don't buy that premise, Esteban.
You don't buy that they don't want war at the moment.
I do not. I don't buy that the U.S. wants war with Iran. It's a secondary thing. I don't believe for a moment that Israel is a rogue actor. I don't buy their premise. I think they're a proxy, every bit as much as Ukraine is a proxy. And in the same way that Donald Trump is trying to pretend as if, that's just Joe Biden's war. I'm just trying to stop the war, while simultaneously give weapons and money. I think the same thing is true for Israel. If Donald Trump wanted to stop, okay, I'm no longer giving you UN support. I'm no longer giving you billions of dollars.
They could have done this so long ago.
Yeah, exactly.
The answers are right there. Like when they talk about they don't know what to do. I mean, Jesus, you just lifted the sanctions on Syria that crushed the economy. You can't sanction Israel. You can't stop some weapon shipments. You can't, anything. But
precisely my point.
I think what's happening at the White House in particular is very interesting, because I think what we're seeing is kind of this head-on clash between your classic neocons, war hawks, against the MAGA folk, right? Against the MAGA people who are genuine in their desire to not expand, U.S. interventionism abroad, or at the very least, as you're saying, use proxies, right? But not send our troops, and not like a waste or industrial base, just pumping money for these forever wars. I think we are seeing that at the moment, and Donald Trump is caught in between. And the thing you always need to remember about Donald Trump, is that he's not a man that is acting out of his good conscience. He's acting out of whether he can get a good deal out of any of these, right? And that be it a diplomatic agreement with Iran, or be it just simply, the money that the Gulf is offering. And I think this is a big point of maybe this will be the tipping point, right? Because I think is in particular the Gulf who don't want a war with Iran, because all of a sudden, like I think I said this a few times in your podcast, that the Gulf, they don't mind funding a war that is a bit, not near their borders. But if all of a sudden the war is with Iran and is right there in the Persian Gulf, then nobody's making money. Then nobody's, what's going to happen with the Vision 2030 plan? What's going to happen with the UAE's, own development plans, and and everything else that they're trying to do with their own countries? This is also why, despite all the pressure during the Yemeni campaign, neither the Saudis nor the Emiratis agreed to reignite the war against Yemen, because they themselves don't want to get sunk into this. So I think that's really where
the Saudis were. I could show you the reporting where the Saudis were attacking the border of Yemen.
Yes, but they didn't expand the war. They just were really keeping it at the border, and in a way, if you can even call it that, being careful not to really, draw the ire of Ansar Allah, because I think at this point we know that Ansar Allah is not really the bear you want to be poking. So that's what I feel. Like Donald Trump all of a sudden got a pledges of upwards of $2 trillion, between Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE. You're talking about a massive sum that was pledged, right, for the US. So now, for that money to start flowing into the coffers of Washington, there needs to be stability. There needs to be some sort of stability. And right now, Israel is the only country that's standing in the way of that. They are the only country that's standing in the way of that. So I think what's going to happen. I really want to know. And at this point, I'm just fascinated by the possibility that at some point the United States is actually going to take a decision to be like, and I feel like it's not going to be something like, oh, we'll stop all weapon shipments. They'll probably just be like, we'll stop the 2,000-pound shipments, or we are doing, I don't know, we are putting a letter of condemnation at the UN, like just anything.
I've seen this before under Joe Biden. Fool me once, that's my fault.
Yeah.
but I wasn't even fooled under Joe Biden because it seems so ludicrous that we give money. Well, Donald Trump was at the ICJ, not Trump, but somebody from the US, like a week ago, arguing that Israel has a right to starve 2 million people.
Yeah.
And now the media is screaming to me that Donald Trump is telling Israel that he must feed the babies. Okay, get out of here. I don't believe it. I just don't believe it. I don't believe that Israel is a rogue actor. I legit believe that they're a proxy.
No, they're not.
I don't believe they are. And so if they decide to go after Iran and say, well, we're going after the nuclear things, do we honestly believe that they're doing that without the U.S. approval?
I think that they're doing it without the complete disapproval. You know what I mean? Like I feel like maybe there's a bit of a finger wagging, but not exactly. Like an actual red line. Because at the end of the day, also Israel master at crossing red lines. You tell them this is a red line, they would jump right over it. And what I wanted to say was about what we're hearing about the starving of the children and just the famine that is spreading in Gaza. That it's just like, all of a sudden, all of these media outlets and all of these governments, I think it's actually more tied to the fact that in 3 days, this mechanism that is going to be run by the U.S. is about to be implemented, right? They're talking that the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is going to start work in 24th of May. Right. And this is, something that all humanitarian agencies have said. This is not humanitarian aid. This is a dangerous, dangerous thing that the United States wants to implement in the south of Gaza, because it's going to forcibly displace Palestinians by essentially asking them to give up their land in exchange for, a measly portion of food. And this is to support Israel, right? The United States is implementing this so that Israel can take over the rest of Gaza. The United States is not here talking about let's protect Palestinians, let's feed Palestinians. No, they want to forcibly displace. Remember, Donald Trump, has been very clear in wanting to take control of Gaza himself, to build his little, Riviera, or a freedom zone, I think was the last name he gave it. But then at the same time, you have this summit in the UN in about 3 weeks that is going to be spearheaded by France and Saudi Arabia, in which they are describing it as a no turning point for the two-state solution. And France, and you saw the statements from France, from Canada, and the UK this week, in which they threaten concrete actions against Israel. Ask them what, who knows? But they talk about the summit at the UN, and they talk about the two-state solution. Now, in practical terms, the two-state solution is a smokescreen. It's just like a pipe dream. It's never going to happen. It's not going to happen. It's not going to be an actual thing. What I see happening is recognition of a Palestinian state and a bunch of agreements that talk about a future something or other, just enough to get Israel to stop the carnage. And then they're going to let them do exactly what they want to do, which is take over Gaza and take over the West Bank. I don't think there's any stopping that. But they will try to find a way to frame it differently, right? To create a different framework for it, so that all of a sudden, you have CNN and the BBC not talking about famine, but talking about reconstruction, or talking about, humanitarian assistance, or talking about, how can these people even live in this toxic wasteland? Which, yes, how can they live in this toxic wasteland that is Gaza, right? So all of a sudden, their displacement is not displacement; it's a humanitarian.
That's what Trump is talking about it now. That's what I mean. This is a scheme. This is not like I
cannot hear you, Jamal. I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's what I mean. This is a scheme. I don't buy this premise that all of a sudden you still can't hear me. Can you guys hear me? Hello, hello, hello. Mic is active. My sound is
I lost you.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Still can't hear me. Hello, hello. Can the audience hear me? Guys, can you hear me? Yeah, the audience can hear me. This is on your side. This is on yours. This is not on me, this is on yours. That's fine. This is on yours. Hold on. Yeah, they can hear us both. Esteban, how about now? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay. Esteban can't hear me. I'm gonna close. I'm gonna